How did you get started in the arts?
I got started in a roundabout way, really. I never thought I was good enough for the arts. My generation had a lot of people who didn't have a lot of confidence. I thought you had to be talented to go to art college. I thought like it was an inbred thing, like, and only geniuses went there. And like I could draw and do and make some sort of attempt at art, but I didn't think I was great, and so I didn't think there was a place for me in an art college. I started going out with a girl who had actually dropped out of our college and had a very cynical view of it. And her friends, after 2 or 3 years, were getting their first show or something like that in a gallery. And I went to their work and saw their gallery work. You know, by this stage, I'd grown up a bit more and realized I didn't have the confidence to get involved in art. And I thought, like I said, that you had to be a genius before you went to college. It's a terrible waste of time, but it's a shame that that's exactly what I thought. So I shared a flat with a guy who was into film. It was amazing, actually, because he had a 35mm camera, which was very unusual in Ireland at that time. We were talking about the mid-1980s, unfortunately, with me. I go back quite a bit. And an awful lot of sort of people who had have careers in film and stuff used to knock at his door and talk to him because he was a cameraman and he knew how to use 35 and he wasn't an RTE or the big Ardmore studios. So he was very accessible. His wife was into animation. So we made an animation rostrum camera. That's a special camera for shooting the artwork for animation. Keeps it steady and the camera's locked over the artwork. And the thing of it is that she got pregnant and sort of gave up the idea of doing some animation. So I said, well, the animation camera's there. I'll give it a bash. When I saw the artwork move, I caught the bug of animation and I got stuck into animation. That was about 85, something like that. He went on to have a great career, by the way. Declan Quinn, he's the brother of Aidan Quinn. He got nominated for shooting Leaving Las Vegas and stuff. So when I felt I had something going for me in animation, it coincided with a very brief night course in NCAD run by a guy called Harry Hess. And so I went and did the night course. It was a year long. I think you got a diploma or a cert or something. Got a cert. And that meant that I had a few skills. And then I went to the Yellow Pages. I don't know if you know what that is, but the Yellow Pages was this big directory full of business things. There were all these video companies. The video was kicking off. And they were making corporate videos. There were so many of them, I thought they'd all need a bit of animation, like a logo animating or some graphs or stuff, and I would be able to do that. I got about 4 or 5 jobs before it collapsed, but it was a good experience. In the middle of all that, I went to an animation festival in Annecy, which is a very famous festival, and I saw animated films as artwork, not just TV Saturday morning stuff, but real art. And I thought I'd take a shot at that, instead of the graphs and the trademarks animating. And I took a stab at a first film, which kind of got me involved a bit in RTE, got me to meet the rest of the animation world. And that sort of anchored me, and I decided to stay in animation. Yeah, I've just finished a book on animation, which was published and launched on the 19th of November, excuse me. Because I was so long around, animation was just really beginning back then. There was a few college industries. There was Quinn Films down in Thurles and Tipperary. There was Aidan Hickey in Clontarf. There was Tim Booth, who was working a bit out of Windmill Lane, which was quite prestigious. There was a couple of other people. And this was all before these big American companies came over. When the American companies came over, I had the choice to try to go in there and learn. But I realized that, that was a style of work that I really didn't want to do. I'd already sort of got more involved in maybe experimental work or arty animation rather than that kind of Disney-esque storytelling stuff. It was brilliant studios, but the upshot of that was that they needed to teach Irish people animation so they could get jobs in these companies. So they set up Ballyfermot Senior College. The animation branch in it was really great when it got going. And Jerome Morrissey, who was the main man in Ballyfermot at that time, got Sullivan Blewitts involved. He got European money involved. He got a couple of Canadian and American to come over to teach. But they still needed more teachers, and I had a smattering of animation. I knew how to set up cameras, and I knew how to work with stuff and teach sort of basic kind of animation workshop type stuff. So I got hired in, which then meant I had a wage for the first time in my life, and I stuck at that for a long time. Well, I'm still teaching a bit, actually, yeah. So there you go. And it was a wonderful moment in animation because in those first 3 years, out of Ballyfermot came an enormous amount of talent. Boulder, Brownbag Films, Cavalier. They all came out of those first 3 years of animation. So there's something in the coffee in the college. It was quite extraordinary. Ballyfermot's gone on to have a couple of other Oscar nominators. I mean, Richie Bainham, who's won 2 Oscars for Avatar, was in those first 3 years. A really sweet guy. They're all sweet and very friendly with each other. And I think an awful lot of the success of animation is those 3 years were very special, and people were very friendly with each other, and they all sort of grew up together, and the industry really grew together. And they all have a great love of animation as well. It was really special, really special. Very, very privileged to be part of it, and just to see all those. Because I was quite old. I was about 32, and I think when I kicked into Ballyfermot, they were all 18, and just to watch them grow and all that, it's just been an amazing experience. Ironically enough, the American studios closed down. But they managed to pick up the debris and make something out of it.
How did you find going from creating work and doing animation to then suddenly teaching people? Was it
Yeah,
something that came naturally to you, or?
I'm not sure if it did come naturally to me. I think in third level, because technically speaking, it was third level, and it was a college of further education, but it really was third level. I don't know how much teaching skills a lot of lecturers get in third level, to be quite honest with you. I mean, I think colleges do put on teaching, training trainers type workshops or whatever, seminars to try to grade people up. But basically, yeah, you could have a degree in farming or something and end up teaching, art. All you needed was a degree. They didn't really care what it was. What I did in Ballyfermot was really workshops, to be honest with you, and I burnt myself out. I had to learn how to teach. I think George Bernard Shaw said that those who can't teach, it's not really fair. It's the people who teach really don't have the time to do any art afterwards. And especially if you think, well, they've got 3 months in the summer or something ridiculous, 2 months in the summer. Why aren't they making work then? But that's not really when inspiration hits you. Inspiration hits you in mid-February, and you really then just want to get out of the bed and start doing that project. You don't want to wait till June, because June comes and there's a gutter to be fixed, or there's a house door to be painted or something like that. And the idea is now stale. So I kind of kept my teaching practice to part-time. So I could drop everything, or not drop everything, but I could work both together. And if I did wake up in the morning with a brilliant idea, I could start it basically that day. If it wasn't a teaching day, I could start on it the next day. And I think that's the reason why I stayed in the game of making films, because I was always part-time, which wasn't easy. Now and again, I got some good film work that could pay as well. It was interesting too to see the commercial changes, because nearly all the students, we gathered around a group called Animu, which was a lobby group for animation, and it coincided with a couple of things happening. It coincided with the collapse of the American studios. The film board was also setting up around that time, and a lot of European funders and stuff were kicking in around that time. So the film board sort of thought they should perhaps support animation, and we were there to lobby them and say, yeah, give it to short art films. And funny enough, a lot of the people who got the short art films went on to form fancy studios and make Saturday morning TV shows. But I think one of the reasons why Irish animation and TV shows are so good for preschool and young children is because they came from an art-based love of animation. And the Frameworks Awards, we had a group called Animu, which lobbied the film board and the Arts Council and RTE for money for short art films. And a lot of people thought, well, I could make 5 or 6 films maybe in my career and live from a Frameworks Award. They normally don't give more than 2 or 3 out to anybody, and it's over quite a long period of time. But a lot of those frameworks, those arty films, help companies sustain themselves in the early days as they're trying to find their legs, making big long-form TV series. That was really down to lobbying and funding. And the Arts Council still funded, and they've got about 4 or 5 Oscar nominees out of the Frameworks Award. They went on to funding TV, long-form TV children's programs, which was a big deal because it's a film board, it's not a TV board. But they made the exception for the animators because of the work stream. The pipeline is so long that your studio has to be kept in place. It's not like a live action studio, which can be maybe a year and a half, just be a producer or 1 or 2 people in an office. And then when you get the money for the movie, you start employing more and more people, maybe 3 or 4 weeks prep, and then maybe 2 months shoot where you have a full crew and all the actors and everything. And then you go into development, into post-production and stuff like that. That's a whole different work form. In animation, you just need a crew together the whole time. So the film board helped us do that as well. It was really, really great that the history of animation is, we went from nowhere, from just, like I was saying, cottage industry, someone like me making very simple paper puppets, cutout animation, very, very simple, to then getting these Americans, then getting the film board and the Celtic Tiger kicked in. And suddenly these studios started sustaining themselves and growing. And Ireland just became a success story. It was like going from 0 to 120, like in 10 seconds,
That's amazing.
Yeah, no, I think it was 87 when the big studio opened up first. They lasted for about 11 years. And there was a body of people coming through the colleges and also getting work in the studios before they collapsed. And then when they collapsed, it kind of went 1, 2, 3 after another. there was a Celtic economy. The people didn't have to immigrate. But about 300 animators at the time when Blue Earth closed, and 100 managed to stay in Ireland and survive. 100 maybe went away to work in abroad in Germany and places like that, and 100 went to America. But it was a real struggle for the Irish animators, but it sort of also coincided with the Celtic Tiger and the movement in Europe, which they tried to set up connections with Europe to set up studio co-productions and international co-productions and development money, particularly for TV work. And they weren't interested at all in supporting art films 5 minutes long or anything like that. They wanted stuff that was 30 minutes long or a TV series, you know. So they were very commercial. It was interesting to see, especially these 3 years from Ballyfermot, which would have been 94 to 95, 95 to 96, and 96 to 97. How they really stepped up and became entrepreneurs. It was quite extraordinary. Now there's over 3,000 people employed, you know. It's quite amazing. I like to say, you know, it's really nice to have been around with them, you know. I wasn't part of it. I'm just not commercial, you know.
Where do you get your inspiration from, or how do you start working on a project? How does it start?
Animation is a very, very slow process, and a craft film process. A lot of it is about writing down stuff and sketching thumbnails. So you do get an inspirational moment, at least I do, and it's usually when I'm about to get up out of bed. I suddenly go, yeah, you know, you could have something there, and I write it down. And 2 months later, I think of something else, and somehow your head is just processing ideas. And eventually I realize that these are dots I can join up. And if that happens, and it doesn't always happen, I think I have a film. So normally I write it down, and what I normally write down is a shot list, actually. I don't always sketch. Most animators I know go straight to sketching and developing character ideas. But I develop the shot list and see if I've got something going. And then I write it up. And then maybe I go for funding, the Arts Council. The last animated film, I went to TG Carr, and perhaps I should digress for a minute. I went from animation into dance film, dance for camera. So dance film originally sort of started locking off a camera, and the dancers would dance on the stage, and we were basically documenting or recording a dance that was choreographed for stage. And then people realized that if you choreographed it for a camera, you suddenly had a novel, suddenly something else was happening. I got interested in that because I'd made a documentary on an artist, Estella Solomons. I'm glad I did, because she was a beautiful genius, a lovely person. I remember interviewing John Scott, who's a very famous choreographer in Ireland. I was sitting down to him talking about Aaron Brady. He says, no, you don't want to make a film about Aaron Brady. You want to make a film about this woman called Robinson. So as he was trying to sell this other idea to me, I noticed he had dancers warming up behind him. And I'm going, God, that is just gorgeous. I'd love to shoot that. And maybe 2 years later, funding came up in RTE called Dance in the Box, with RTE and the Arts Council, that were going to put 12.5 grand into very short movies for 6 minutes. And they had to be made within 2 months, I think. And there were to be dance for camera things. So the idea was that a director would hook up with a choreographer, and they'd bounce off each other and then produce a beautiful piece of art. I phoned up John, and he said, you're the sixth director to phone me today. I said to him, do you know that scene from your White piece? I'd like to take that first opening sequence and marry it up against the second sequence. So I had all these chunks of movies. He was quite impressed, and I knew his work, and I knew bits that I thought would fit together. He said, listen, you're the first director to come to me and say, I want to use you, I want to use these bits. Whereas the other director sat down and said, okay, John, what can you do for me? You know, I'm going to make quite a few things. But that dance for camera is kind of something I really like, because modern dance can be very, very abstract and non-narrative. And I really like the idea of trying to get narrative out of a non-narrative piece, but not in your face narration, obviously. Just the movement trying to tell something. And it's not that unlike animation in respects that animation is about capturing movement and about timing the movement, and that's very much in the fore of an animator. You know, an animator is always thinking about how heavy something is to jump, and you know how long that will take, and how an old person might walk, how a young person will walk. It's all about movement and timing, and so is dancing, and so there is a connection with them.
Do you work with dancers and say, no, I need you to walk across this way, I need to walk that way?
I would take a very hands-on approach and direct them quite a bit. I'd be quite familiar with the work first. So I'd take bits. I still do that. I see work and I go, I really like that, and I think it can be changed slightly and mean something. You can be very lucky, and it can all fit into place, and you don't have to do too much direction. There's a whole bunch of problems on set. I mean, one of the first things you have to think of is keeping the set happy. There's nothing worse than negativity, so you have to be very careful about that. The other thing is the approach of direction. If you come from a craft-based filmmaking like I do, you tend to have it planned where you're going to go. But an awful lot of people come to dance films from dance practice. And so their attitude would be more, I'm going to let it flow out of me. And I want you to capture the spirit of the dance or the spirit of how it might be done on stage even, which to me, stage and camera are total opposites. And when I say stuff like that to some dance directors from a dance background, they get very upset. So I would come in as a director, and I love the idea of the fluid of continuity of shots through movement. Because a dancer is like an actor that learns the words. They will do the same movements again and again, and often they're very dedicated and very hardworking people. You can get several shots, close-ups, high shots, mid shots, shots from different angles. And if they do the same dance, you can just edit them really smoothly. I really admire dancers. I think you admire their work, you admire what they're doing, and you're gentle with them. They're very obliging. It's really amazing. And it's really lovely when you're talking technical stuff. You have to be careful about before the camera and not behind the camera. So an awful lot of people who come from craft film work tend to be worried about the lenses and the cameras and the lights and all that kind of stuff, and forget about the people in front of the camera. With dance, it's also really lovely because they have to limber up and stay warm. And so maybe you're getting advice from the camera person about the lens to use. And you notice there's 3 or 4 people just dancing around, doing their own things, warming themselves up. And really helps the creative environment. So I really love working with them. Yeah, but the problem is it's not a very well-known genre. Dance for camera is, when it started off first, they'd send films to festivals and they'd look at them and thought they were music clips for video bands. And so they'd put it away, to the extent that people decided that they'd start their own dance film festivals, maybe attach them to international dance festivals. Now there's a healthy kind of circuit. Like I said, the last animation, I think it was 2017 I made, with Teacher Carroll. And the reason why I started mentioning dance is because I approached Teacher Carroll with an Irish dancing idea, which in the end never got funded. And I made it as a 1-minute standalone piece. There's a lot of 1-minute films competitions. So I did a 1-minute dance thing about Irish dance, where the dancing got very distorted from a camera effect. So I phoned them up and said, listen, guys, I know you got some money somewhere. Why don't we do a serious dance for camera with Irish dancing? Because it can't all be ballet and like contemporary dancing. And the guy I talked to, I suppose when you get on in the business, you get to know certain people. And I'd really encourage people to go to festivals and get to know commissioning editors or camera people. Because what he said to me was, you know what, Steve, I remember 10 years ago at the Galway Film Fleadh, you told me a great story. Why don't you make a film about that? And I'll give you funding for that, And I went, okay. So I wrote up the budget and a project that was an animation about the famine. He approved the budget, and I got a really big funded animation out of it. But it was something that he had heard 10 years ago. So I always advise people to go to festivals and don't give up on ideas. That idea, I knew it was a great idea. It's a small pond, South Ireland. You can pick up maybe funding from a small centre like the Galway Film Centre, or maybe some arts officer in Offaly or somewhere like that. It's a very good arts officer down there. There's even a residency there you can get for animation, which is very rare. So those are the kind of starting places. And then you try to get a framework, or you try to get some small gig out of a project out of Teacher Car or RTE or something. RTE Junior might have a small project going. Eventually, after X amount of years, you get to know people better. And so when I phoned up the commissioning editor for Teacher Car at the time, he kind of knew me and knew I wasn't a messer, and instead said, I really remember that story. It was a great story you told me. Why don't you make that? So I still had it on a shelf and I could pull it down 10 years later. And the film project I'm working on now, I think I wrote that up in 2008. It's now been in development for 4 years. It's a feature now. So it's a big, I think it's been more than 4 years in development and still mightn't get made. It's amazing how many ideas. Don't get disillusioned that you put in 6 proposals in a row and they've all been shot down. It is really discouraging, of course. My advice to people who are getting involved in film is to try to have 3 or 4 projects at one time. So if one project dies, you can sort of say, oh, well, there's another one out there that might just make it through and the dream's still alive. So stagger them.
I know some people, they could struggle with like, oh, I can only focus on one project at a time. Do you have any advice for how to separate them or how to allocate time for each?
One of the things I do is I think it out in my head a lot, So when it comes to writing it down, it nearly flows out, which means I'm walking around in the daydream for a long time and neglecting other things, perhaps. To have 2 or 3 projects, it's really great. Like the film I made about the heroin addict is now doing the festival circuit. And I have a film in development, which the producers are getting a script writer to write up. And so I have time now to develop a third project, and I haven't. So it doesn't always work, but it's really great as a project is coming towards the end. You can't force these things, and you can't chase money. You can't say, oh, there's a project coming up. Oh, they're looking for this. I'll make something up. It really does have to be heartfelt. I think it is good if you're persistent and you do put your hopes and dreams into a project. And so when it's rejected, you're crushed. There's no point pretending you're not. If you fall in love with that project so much and it's shut down, well, I can't ever go there again. I can't go into that deep well that I went and pulled out this wonderful piece of art. I can't do that again. That's just nonsense. Of course you can. And again, you don't have to bury the project and throw it away and it's dead. Very often it is, particularly in the film business. The film business is particularly ruthless like that, and it's got a very high casualty rate because of that. Unlike other art forms, if you're a dancer, you can, dance in the street and busk and you might make some money. Or if you're a poet, all you need is a pencil and paper and you could write poetry and you might die of starvation, but there might be a body of work after you can publish. With filmmaking, you really need money up front on a screen to validate what you're trying to do and to show people what you're trying to do. And that means you need money up front. Now, YouTube and iPhone cameras have done a lot to diminish that obstacle, but it's still an obstacle to a degree. Yeah, you still have to have certain production values. I think to answer your question is that how I keep it together by holding on to some ideas and by not being precious about ideas and knowing you can do better, and you'll crack it eventually. Maybe rewrite the project. I mean that Jackie Robinson one, I wrote that project about 4 or 5 times. I changed the name so people wouldn't recognize it and all sorts of stuff, and it never got made. Eventually it was, and I was really happy. It was a great little documentary. Yeah, no, it's a really tough business though, getting rejections, because funding is so important to get your images together. You have to be persistent and learn. I think I've learned a lot. I think rejections can help you learn, actually, and make it better.
I'm kind of going back a wee bit, but in terms of when you first got into the arts, how did your family react to your choice of going into the arts?
Back in the day, I think the arts. When I sit at portfolios now for the IADT, for the animation course there, the artwork that's coming from colleges now is amazing. So the art scene wasn't there then, and my parents would have thought it was close to begging or something. It certainly wasn't a profession. When I got my first film made and was shown in RTE, I was 28. The first thing they thought, well, will you get a job in RTE now? And they were thinking of a pension. Their idea, they didn't sort of say, geez, he's made a film, that's amazing. It was basically, there's a chance he might get a job in RTE. So the arts meant nothing. The idea of making art is still absurd to them. So they just think I'm a lecturer in IADT. I'm a part-time lecturer now. But that's what they tell themselves, and that keeps them happy. Even still, if I make a film, I don't even bother telling them. And that would be the same with most of my family too. So I don't know. I mean, maybe if I'd got famous, that might have changed things. I did show them a dance film about 20 years ago, and it was like, what's contemporary dance? So you're wasting your time. And I was my own worst enemy. I just had no confidence. And I think in the school system in Ireland in the 70s, it just bet the crap out of you. They really did attack your confidence, I really think. And I think one of the things I've noticed about students coming through now is I'm much more confident and better trained in secondary school. The only thing I worry about them is they seem to be more anxious, a lot more anxiety among 18, 20-year-olds now. And I think that might be, in a way, inhibiting the way my lack of confidence inhibited me. I didn't understand that you go to school to learn. I thought you had to be a genius to be accepted by an art college. I didn't know you could go there and learn the art. Also, the funding around at that time is pretty weak. I could criticise the Arts Council a little bit. I know the film officer very well there, and she's been quite good to me. But there isn't enough. They don't really fund animation as much as they should, I think, especially experimental art-based. They still think it's commercial. The Arts Council is very, very screwed up about this idea that they can't promote commercial studios. And so they're very, very hesitant about supporting someone. And I don't think they realise there are people with independent practices who are not a commercial studio who make animated films. There's quite a few out there who are really Alan Holly would be a good example of it. Alan Holly has a group of people around him that are definitely independent workers who attach themselves to Alan's studio. So there is a growing independent and they get overlooked because of the massive studios we have in animations. But there is an art form out there, an animation art form, which is animation that's celebrating animation for animation's sake, making quite interesting movies. I think they're very Irish in so much as a lot of them is about death and misery, which we seem to do very well. Another phenomenon too that might be good is the people that collated around Cartoon Saloon, which is Tom Moore, Nora Toomey, and Paul Young, and they were also the second wave of graduates that came from Ballyfermot, much later than those first three magic years. Those really special years, and I write about them in the book as the specials. But there was a couple more that came out, and quite a bunch of people, Tom Caulfield and Barry Donoghue, and they make really, really wonderful feature films. So they're kind of independents who've gone commercial, but keep their independent. Like in Wolf Walkers, which is one of the last movies they made, they have quite experimental sections in it. They have simple paper cutout sections in it, made by Evan McNamara. It's charcoal and paper, and it's a wolf running through a thicket of woods, and it's all rushing past them, and it's all charcoal work. It's not quite experimental, but it's definitely out there. They were taking a risk with the art, introducing that art form. And a lot of the studios will encourage people to apply for the Frameworks Sports Scan on Screen Ireland's Animation Award, because they know even when the CEOs come to the end of year show, they like to see good animation skills there. And some students just want to work in a studio and they showcase their skills, and it's great they get hired. But I also love to see someone doing something experimental, because they often have problems they want to solve, and it isn't often solved by a good animator or conventional. It's often solved by someone coming up with a wacky idea. And so if you look at a lot of Saturday morning TV shows, there's an awful wacky, mad stuff in there, and that's done by experimental filmmakers who get hired into a studio and say, no, we want you to have this strange character who comes in and messes up everything for the kids. And they could be made of charcoal and they just draw and smear everything everywhere. So you need someone who's an experimental filmmaker to do that more than a conventional filmmaker. And I think that's one of the secrets why we've done well in Ireland, because the CEOs love animation. So they're going at it, looking at animation. They don't necessarily look at it, well, which is going to make the best box office for us, or which is going to make the biggest returns. Now, obviously, they do that because they have worried about paying wages. So they are very canny that way, and they had to learn that. But every one of those producers I know, Bobby Cullen, he's gone back to drawing comics, which he's always loved, and after directing a feature film and many long form TV series, and he's gone back to trying to be a director of animation and direct short films again, which is really lovely. Cal Gaffney from Randbag Films was an experimental filmmaker, and then he went on to Give Up Your Old Sins and direct that. But he's a real CEO guy, he's a money goer, he goes after money, but he comes at it from a love of animation. He still goes to festivals to watch the animation, not just to say, well, which is the next big thing that I can make money out of. The Andrew Kavanagh and Gary Timpson love to make short films still. Especially animation short films tend to be very big events. And I used to be involved in the Galway Film Fleadh for many, many years. And you'd come up against these very smart kids. I would go, where's the story in this? And they'd be going, no. I wanted to put a chase scene in to show that I can make chase scenes. And you'd go, there's no need for a chase scene. Or murder. An awful lot of these kids love to have murders in their short films. So that was maybe my word for anybody's advice. If you do, get $2,000 or $20,000 to make a film, make sure it's something that celebrates what you're trying to say, and try and get the best people to work with you. It's a bit of a neck to go and ask people, to work for nothing, maybe some expenses. There are people who'll do it for you, and then you bond with them. Like I made a film in tough conditions with people who got paid damn all, And as soon as I got a big budget, I went straight back to them, and one of them couldn't take it and said, "But I really appreciate reaching out." And everybody else, I remember the guy did it, but it was Ray Harmon. He's a very well known composer. He did this amazing piece of work for nothing. So I give him a good budget the next time around. These people really like to work, at any opportunity, and I gave them something really interesting. It was actually shot in Palestine, would you believe? Hard to believe now. In the West Bank, you wouldn't be able to shoot anything now. But it was a workshop film that just was really good. I said, listen, I think this can be a film. They raised some money for the editor, but the composer, we couldn't raise money. And the film, the guy who shot it, Tim Fleming, is a very, very well-known filmmaker. He just did it to fly over to Palestine. I thought it'd be great crack. So he shot it for nothing, basically. It's Andrei Rublev. It's a famous film by a guy called Andrei Tchaikovsky, I think his name is. Anyway, it's a beautiful film and it's very, very famous. And the first film looked like exactly out of that film. And I said, listen, this is going to be a good movie. So he got really excited and he shot it. He was really great to work with. And we got sound on it. And about a year and a half later, that was great.
Is there a particular genre of animation you absolutely adore or you really don't like? Or do you love it all?
You can, like I said, in a lot of children's shorts, you can look at work that can have some nice feel to it, and you're going that the animation is very good or the computer technology that went into it is very advanced and you're kind of going, yeah, that's really class and some of it's really good. Yeah, no, I would tend to go for art pieces. I'm just trying to, Caroline Leaf was somebody who inspired me. She has this thing called Two Sisters, or I've forgotten the French name of it. It was made in Quebec. It's bilingual, but Two Sisters by Caroline Leaf, and it's made by scratching onto the emotion of film. So the figurative work, it isn't very polished, but it's exceptionally well made. She spent 2 years at least working on it. Beautiful sound on it too. Very much a woman's story. It's really the love between two sisters, and the love between someone as a controlling sister and an artistic writer. Yeah, that one's always stuck out to me. There's a film that I saw as a child, and it was cut-out animation, with very primitive animation, but very, very dense colors. It stands up 60 years later, something mad like that, as not a primitive, but a very, very alive piece of work. And you just look at that and go, this is primitive animation. It was done to classical music, and it's just alive. And it was astonishing, It's called The Thieving Magpie by two Italians. When I shot my first piece of cutout animation, it immediately came into my head. So it was sitting there in my head since a kid. I really wish as a child I'd dabbled in filmmaking. Basically, I love that Thieving Magpie has got no dialogue in it at all. Caroline's films tend to have very little dialogue in them. So for me, it's about telling pictures, and I wish I'd dabbled in telling pictures. I had the wherewithal to think of that. In fact, I still think that's a bit of a problem in education in secondary school, but they tend to think filmmaking is about what the actor says and the dialogue. It's very, very little to do with dialogue. Good filmmaking is very little to do with dialogue and words. It's to do with showing the emotion and showing someone think, not saying, I think I could do this. It's someone thinking and maybe cutting away to something, and you go, they should go through that door. That's the door they should go through, without saying, I wonder should I go through that door? You don't want dialogue. It can really mess up the film. I think they should teach that more in secondary school and get that over to kids, that if you're interested in filmmaking, don't put away the pencil and draw thumbnails or think of screenshots, but put away dialogue. It's a waste of time, especially for kids. It's too much like an exercise in English literature, and they have to get away from that.
So you've written a book. Tell us about it. What's it about? Where can we find it?
It's a book, the first book ever on Irish animation, and it's called Drawing the Line, a personal look at the history of Irish animation. It's available online on my website, stevewoods.ie, and it's also available in the IFI bookshop, Irish Film Bookshop, books upstairs, Charlie Burns in Galway. It was very satisfying to see them take so many, but not Easton's or the big shops. And unfortunately, it's going really well. It's sold a third of the print already in about 2 months. That was kind of amazing. Because I think it's needed. It's going to distribute it to libraries and stuff. So it's doing quite well. I think it's kind of a textbook for a lot of students because it's the first history of Irish animation. I wanted to show in the first chapter where animation came from. So I wanted a story of Irish animation, not to start with 1960s when it sort of, you can say it kicked off then. I wanted to say that the history of animation and the history of early pioneer film is our history. You don't go to an English book to read it or a French book to read it or an American book, especially American books, because they tend to start with LA. But the first feature film was Walt Disney's Snow White, when it wasn't. It was a German woman who made it, Ahmed. In fact, actually, it was an Argentinian film, but that's lost, so we don't talk about that. I think it was called The Apostle, and it was made in Argentina 1927 or something. And then 1927, this German woman made a feature. And then in 1937 or 39 or something, Snow White was made. But anyway, I wanted filmmakers, I wanted them to understand, the animators, to realize that we come from filmmaking. So many animators think that we're a genre away from filmmaking. And one of the things I want to beat into students' heads when I get them is to say, no, we're not a separate form. We're filmmakers. You can tell stories by pictures, film scripts and animation scripts are the same, storyboards are the same. Animators invented storyboards and gave them to the filmmaking industry. So there's a cinematic thing. So there's a massive convergence between animation and live action now. I would say since Star Wars. But now so many films have animated computer-generated images in it made by animators. So there's a massive convergence now between live action and animation. And of course, animation's always been this wonderful genre that's survived on its own and always will. And so I wanted to say we're part of the founding of filmmaking and we're part of filmmaking. And so the birth stories of filmmaking, you know, the Lumiere brothers and Edison, plus the early film animators like Emile Cole, who really was the father of animation. Those people are part of our Irish story. And we had a very, very early, like someone's just made a documentary about them, the Horgan family, who pioneered Irish filmmaking. James Horgan was the first person to create a piece of Irish animation. And curiously enough, I was involved in the first Galway Film Fleadh, and we had a very first retrospective of Irish animation at it. And we had also the very first meeting of Irish practitioners, I'll say, and a couple of professionals. We found out at that Fleadh that just a few miles away in a garage, the very first animation had been retrieved because James Horgan's grandson, also called James Horgan, had kept all the stuff, and he knew this piece was a piece of animation. It's only 6 seconds survived. So we realized we had enough animation, we thought, in the country to have an Irish competition for the next Fleadh. And we did, and every Fleadh subsequently. And the award is called the James Horgan Award. So it was a really lovely thing to happen in the very first Fleadh, to have this sort of resurrected piece of animation. The book starts off with that, really, as Irish animation, and jumps quickly to the amateurs around. It was a seminar that described an amateur. She was more than an amateur, but she couldn't make her money doing animation. She was in the Cork Film Society and she made animation. So that was in the late 50s and early 60s. She got a piece in RT too, but the real animation kicked in when a German advertising company decided that RTE could do with an Irish-based animation company to animate commercials and stuff. And they trained up 6 art students from Limerick. One of them, Roisin Hogan, went on to run an animation course in Dún Laoghaire. She incorporated animation because she had some skills in that direction. He made some animation films and facilitated the students. Chapter 3 is the Americans arriving, which is really a standalone chapter in itself about the effect of that, and then how people survived the crash and how this big studio started going, like Brown Bag. And then there's a thing on education, which is bittersweet because I have good memories of working in education and bad memories. And then the rest of it is about the wave of people coming through and festivals and animation support groups and questions about the future. So the book is it's about 180 pages, I think. An interesting thing about it, it's got 35 stills from Irish films, animations obviously, coloured stills. And I don't think there's any other book in Irish cinema has that many stills reproduced in a book. So it's worthwhile for that alone. So it's a labour of love. Yeah, you can get it on my website, stevewoods.ie. If you go to stevewoods.com, you get a Texan knife maker, so you don't want to go there.
Is there anything you think that the government could do better or more of to help support artists, filmmakers, animators, to help them create their work, make their work, fund their work, anything like that?
Yeah, well, I guess it's more money, really, isn't it? Filmmaking tend to need money up front. It's different from a lot of art forms. I'm sure there's loads of theatre directors would pick a bone with me on that. I think stepping stones between graduation, what would be considered more professional in our business, that would be considered broadcast quality. There should be a stepping stone between those two. Because of new media, a lot of the production values of graduation films are very high anyway and can be shown in TV. Then I think there should be some sort of holding area where those people are trying to get on their feet should be helped a bit. And I don't think it's enough of that, because to get a framework, you really have to have a bit more work than just your graduation film, unfortunately. Well, that can sometimes get you it, especially if it's very, very good. And some of the students are coming through are geniuses, they're just brilliant, and they are getting frameworks straight away. But I would like to see more help, like the arts residency in Burr, which comes out of the online film festival. I'd like to see more of that, and more of that in the North too. The Northern Ireland Screen is working miracles with very small budgets, but they really should be getting more, and maybe have a All Ireland kind of vibe going on, because when Frameworks was All Ireland, it really did help the people up in Derry. So the other thing is maybe some sort of centre of excellence, that after you get your first Frameworks and there could be another level of residency. Or Screen Ireland are doing a lot of mentorship, which is a very good idea. both in commercially, trying to help people, but also should be more mentorship in how to create alternative, maybe experimental practice. I think it'd be really lovely if the Arts Council could get involved more and maybe help mentor someone through, give them a small budget and maybe give them a better budget, then give them another budget and then let them in on the big 50 grand ones, the big film project ones. It'd be nice to see if they can do that. Now, their argument would be that they don't have enough money. I think the Arts Council should wise up about animation isn't children's Saturday morning TV, and it isn't people who are ambitions to open up big studios. There is a private independent project. And I think RTE and TGCAR are pretty approachable, but they should show not just animated short films, but short films. I mean, Lily Dillon badgered into her way into RTE to demand a series of showing short films. When we got our first nomination, which was Give Up Your Old Sins, RTE realised that they had funded lots and lots of frameworks instead of just showing them once. They showed them as a short film genre series. And there's enough there. I mean, the shelf life in animation is amazing. You can make an animated film and you can show it 20 years and nobody goes, oh, that's dated, especially if it's got an individual art touch to it. Whereas you see a short film and they go, oh, look at how stupid cell phones were 15 years ago. So they should be showing short animations all the time and short films all the time, especially the ones that they own or they have rights over. Yeah, so they're showing films more and funding films more. I mean, that's really what it is. They should be thinking of stepping stones for people in their careers. Maybe have some iPhone awards or something, and helping young people, to sustain them. You got to remember that too. That even if there is more money and more schemes, you should really be aware of all the schemes that are out there. There's loads and loads of different schemes. That the first thing they teach them, I don't know where they take them. They take them to maybe Tory Island or something. All the commissioning editors, all the people in the Arts Council who fund projects, all the people who have anything to do with funding, and they teach them how to say no. That's the first thing. No, you could be walking in with the greatest film project ever designed, and they'll go, no, that's it. So you have to get used to hearing no and saying, yes, I know what you're saying, but you're wrong. And you pitch it again, and they'll say no, and eventually you'll get a yes. Funders will say no. The problem with frameworks, aren't going after frameworks as much as they used to. I just don't understand it. In frameworks, they'll get about 20 applicants, of which 10 are people who just don't know what animation is. The other 10, they're going for four projects. Any one of those 10 could be a good frameworks. So they're finding reasons not to give it. So if you get rejected for frameworks, it's not that your project is crap. It's just that they're looking for a reason. In the case of Dutch Darkness, which is the one that I ended up funding myself, it was because it was pixelation. It was a type of animation you do with human beings. And they're going, that's not drawing right. It's a great idea, but we won't use it. But it ended up doing quite well. The funding letters say stuff like, your idea was great and it was very difficult and all that. And you just read that as you're lousy, you're no good, you'll never make a film in your life. And you can also ask for notes from film. A lot of people, if, well, why didn't you go for it? And they'll say, well, the end was crap, which is very often the case. And they're very often right. So, go for notes, reader's notes.
Thank you so much for coming on today and talking to us. It's been amazing to talk to you and discover your line of work. And we can find your book at stevewoods.com.
Well, I appreciate you reaching out. Thank you very much.